Well, we're back after several weeks off for what? The Olympics, and how great were they for the United States? We're going to get into student loans. No, we're not going to promise free tuition, but we're going to tell you how to deal with that. But first, how about a journalist roundtable? We'll do that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back. Well, joining me, as often is the case, is John Micek. He's the editorial page editor of the Patriot News, and Angela Couloumbis. She's, can I call you an investigative reporter? Every time I read you, it looks like you're doing. John used to do that when you were. You still do a little bit of that, even though.
I'm a tourist.
What can I tell you, Angela Couloumbis? All right, John, this has been about as slow a summer. Well, the legislature always goes home for the summer.
Yeah.
But having said that, as we look to the fall, they're coming back in the middle of September. What's the state legislature and the governor going to do?
Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations on the gold in the 200 meters in
there you
Rio.
Go. Yeah,
you were away for the Olympic. You were away for the Olympic break.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, you've been right, Terry. It's been an amazingly slow summer. I mean, particularly compared to 2015, when at this time last year we were all immersed in budget purgatory with Governor Tom Wolf's first spending plan. They got that out the door relatively early this year, and then
I wonder why.
Yeah, campaigns, conventions, everyone bugged out and went home, and here we are, with Labor Day rapidly approaching, and if there's going to be a big issue, I mean, they're in session for all of 9 days between September and Election Day. They're going to try to take a run again at pension reform, and that's that big $65 million thing hanging out there, million hanging out there, and they still have that to do.
Yeah, go ahead.
And they have supposedly the governor is going to be calling at some point for a special session on opioid addiction and treatment, so that's going to take up some time in the fall. But it doesn't seem to me that they're going to be tackling anything major and massive before a major election year.
But you're right. They don't want to do it. I mean, do they want to step in mud? They don't want to create a controversy, do they, at this point, Angela?
No. I mean, even though I think the legislature's positions tend to be fairly stable, people reelect their legislator. They're always worried in an election year about looking bad, and so close to a major election where we were expecting, turnout to be perhaps record.
I think you're right about that. Hey, just switching gears, John. I know you've covered this. As we speak, Donald Trump is about 9 points behind Secretary Clinton in this state. Yet they're all over the state with commercials and visits. You've covered a lot of these. Does that surprise you?
No, I mean, the Trump campaign has already identified Pennsylvania as one of 5 states where it's going to live or die. I mean, it's ironic that they're doing that given the fact that the state has gone reliably blue for 28 years at the presidential level. But, the Trump campaign is contending here. I mean, they're down 9 to 11 points depending on which statewide poll you look at. So it seems like it's a bit of an uphill road. If you look at the electoral map of the state, it's kind of hard to look at the path for victory for Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. But, the campaign is here. We had Governor Mike Pence of Indiana in Bucks County earlier in the week. Trump was in Altoona, I think, the week before that. Their candidate visits fast and furious, certainly.
Yeah, I know, and a lot of...
And on the air, too.
And does that surprise you? You've covered these.
No, not at all. I mean, I think...
it's good for you all. Come on.
And this election year is, it's unpredictable, even though the polls...
Great point.
Definitely show a surge for Hillary Clinton in Pennsylvania. You don't know what's going to happen, in 2-3 months when people start really tuning in 100% on this race.
Yeah. And you saw Trump sort of moderate his position, such as it is on immigration reform this week.
I still can't figure out quite what it is, except he's going to get rid of the people, the bad ones, the bad immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, not so much a pivot to Hispanics as it is trying to convince white voters that he's not a terrible person. It seems like.
You could be right. Look, I don't know how deeply I want to get into this, but you've been covering this Attorney General situation, and here we are. We have an acting Attorney General. The governor has recommended someone to replace the acting Attorney General, a guy named Beamer, who he got, who's Inspector General. Can you put that in a minute? What's going on here?
Essentially, it's the mop-up from the Kathleen Kane mess. She resigned her position last week after being found guilty on all charges for abuse of office and perjury. And so her immediate second in command rose up to acting Bruce Castor, who's a former Montgomery County commissioner and also the district attorney, the former district attorney down there. And he's a Republican. But the governor has the ability to name somebody new, and he did. And he named Kathleen Kane's former second in command, Bruce Beamer.
Right.
And he was somebody who actually testified against Kane during her criminal trial.
Let's stop here. Let's run to a break. When I come back, maybe we can just do this conclusion with Kathleen Kane. I must say, it seems like the interest in this, and I want you to think about this as we go. This was high profile, big. All of a sudden, after the trial, she is found guilty on 9 charges. One, the perjury, I guess, the most serious one. It all goes away. It's like you all were writing about it, and then maybe it's over, and that's the reason. But I want to find out, Kathleen Kane, what happened and why it happened. We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, now celebrating 100 years as the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program with Angela Couloumbis and John Micek. Both cover state politics, both cover some national politics, some even do crime intervention, into folks who broke the law. But before we get to that, before we go back to, well, let's finish Kathleen Kane. I'll go to you, back to you. Sentencing is coming up.
Right.
Any sense about that?
People seem to think that she's going to get some jail time. They also seem to think that she did herself no favors. The day, her last day in office, she gave an interview to local reporters in Scranton in which she said she had no regrets. Judges don't like to hear that after you have been convicted of, on all counts in this case.
I tell you, I've heard a number of people on talk shows and others suggest that maybe probation, given the fact that there wasn't and plus it wasn't like murder, John. It wasn't like rob. You know what I mean? But it is a fairly, her career is wrecked, right?
Yeah, it is a fairly serious charge. It was a felony perjury charge. Ernie Priet did 14 months in 1995 for federal mail fraud charges. When a public official breaks the law, particularly as egregiously as this. I think some kind of jail time is probably inevitable, if only to send a message to those who might come after. And particularly, as Ange notes, that when there's no penitence, that's the single worst thing Mrs. Kane could have done for herself.
But that's been sort of her attitude throughout the whole process, that she still thinks she did nothing wrong. Do you believe that? You've covered this, written about this extensively.
And if nothing else, statements from her attorneys really signaling that they're going to be appealing her conviction, and also they felt like they were unable to really tell the true story behind her defense, which goes into the whole pornographic email scandal. It's too long of a story to get into, but there seems to be a sense from her that she still believes she's innocent.
All right, let's switch gears a bit. Pennsylvania has one of the most important U.S. Senate races in the country. Pat Toomey is up for re-election, second term. No doubt a conservative. I think you both would agree. I'm not using that pejoratively. Yeah. He's a conservative. But this week, and by the way, the race is pretty close. Yep. Could go either way. But this week, guns emerged as a huge issue in the campaign.
Yeah, it's one of the top 5 most closely watched races. It's one of those that could determine control of the Senate. You got Toomey going against the former Rendell and Wolf administration official Katie McGinty. And this week they both picked up dueling endorsements from pro-gun control groups. Senator Toomey picked up the endorsement of the PAC run by Gabby Giffords, former Arizona congresswoman who was, of course, shot and nearly died a few years back. Then later in the week, Katie McGinty picked up the endorsement of Ceasefire PA, the Philadelphia-based gun control group. I mean, this is a really big issue. I mean, the one sort of wedge that Toomey has, because he is a sort of, and this is, again, not pejorative, he is a capital C sort of fiscal conservative. Yeah. I mean, that is his record. But the one place where he's emerged as something like a moderate has been on the issue of gun background checks and on gun control. He sponsored that bill with Joe Manchin of West Virginia.
3 years ago.
3 years ago now. And that's a big get for him to have Gabby Giffords' PAC on his side, particularly in a race this tight.
Look, I talked about that. Pennsylvania passed in 1995, a Republican-controlled legislature, a background check law. Now, there are loopholes in it, don't get me wrong. And a guy named Tom Ridge, a Republican, signed it with the NRA's support. So you can see how far this issue has gone in terms of the polarization between the two sides. Do you think this is going to drive the gun issue into major relevance in this campaign?
I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt. It's something that Toomey can point to, particularly in a race where you have a lot of third-party issue money coming in. The AFL-CIO has been hammering him in statewide ads as a creature of Wall Street. McGinty is up with a bio ad now. This is one thing that he can point to say, well, look, I'm not Donald Trump. I mean, he's been trying to create as much distance between Trump as he possibly can, and say, this is a place where I am an independent. I may be a Republican, but I think for myself.
All right, before I let you go, there's a situation in Philadelphia, and for most of the folks around the state, this may not mean as much to them, but this potentially is important because we're talking about arguably the single most important labor leader in this state, correct?
Right.
Give us a quick rundown.
John Dougherty, he heads the electricians union in Philadelphia. He has, and his union has helped bankroll many a Democratic campaign. So
like his brother for Supreme Court,
and his brother is on the Supreme Court now. His candidate, the candidate he supported, is now mayor of Philadelphia. So he's not a trivial political figure in any way. He may not be a household name. The FBI earlier this month did a series of raids in Philadelphia on the union offices and also on the office of a city councilman who is close to Dougherty. And yesterday, we found out that there was also a search warrant that was served on an investigator in the Attorney General's office, of all places, who is close to another figure who's close to Dougherty. So it is a rapidly developing story.
So here's the point. I'm not saying we're not saying it will happen.
Right.
But conceivably, the tentacles could go out and involve other important politicians in the state.
Absolutely.
You agree?
Yes, although some would also argue that Dougherty himself is probably one of the most powerful figures in state politics.
Well, look, I want to thank both of you for coming in. All right, student loans, we're going to take them up. Well, let me talk about it this way. Let me put it this way. The cost of college, what can you do to help alleviate that? We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit betterwithcoal.com.
Well, as I said at the outset of the program, we cannot promise you free college tuition, but we're going to provide some assistance in terms of how to deal with it. Joining me is Corinne Sherman. She's a Senior Vice President, Fee Services with the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association, and Lisa Barshinger, First Capital Federal Credit Union in York, all, of course, into the consumer assistance business. Did you like that? Consumer assistance, I like that. All right, Corinne, let's start with you. We all know how the difference in income between those folks who go to college and those folks who don't, those folks who have degrees and who don't. And again, I don't know that college is for everyone. Let me get that straight out as a college professor. But having said that, talk a little bit about those differences.
Yeah, those who graduate with a high school education are said their earnings potential max out at about $30,000 compared to those who graduate with some type of college education. Salaries are said to max out around $57,000. So there is a significant difference there in long-term earning potential.
Right. And we also have differences in terms of unemployment, right? The higher,
Absolutely.
Lower, go ahead, talk a bit about that.
Yeah, if someone doesn't graduate from high school, the unemployment rate is at about 15%, whereas if someone graduates with a bachelor's degree or higher, that's really only at about 4.7%.
Right, and you also have a lot of underemployment among, well, you know, that some college graduates, but a lot more among folks who don't. Either you go to college or you get into a trade and you get a vocation. If you don't, you're sort of drifting around. And it's really important, I think, in that aspect. But let me ask you another. Look, one of the things that a lot of colleges, as a professor, we're working on providing need-based scholarships to help people, but the costs are really going up. There's no doubt about that, right?
Right. And you look at, needs-based scholarship, and it just, the cost of tuition has risen so significantly compared to the cost of the median family income. So I think, the needs-based scholarships and grants get harder for families.
Right.
One of the things that I find, too, is a lot of families have problems even knowing how to go after the need-based scholarships and grants.
And the cost of a college education really is rising at a faster pace than even the cost of healthcare and housing.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Well, okay, let's just start going through. Put your assistant's hat on as I started this segment. Let's go through a couple of things that matter most in terms of aiding people who want to, send their children to college, or adults who want to go back. Go ahead.
I think the biggest thing is looking at, as I said, the scholarships and the grants. I know from my own experience with my own children, getting them to go after what's available out there can be a challenge. Having your student look into different work-study programs. And then, of course, there's the federal loan. But even if you look at what the assistance is from the federal government, I think an incoming freshman can get a maximum of like $5,500. And as we all know, that's not going to even begin to cover a year of college.
Yeah, and there's some pretty significant differences between private schools and public schools, and then community college is even less expensive. So select getting the right place really matters. So is there a process that, you're now, folks are considering this very early in their high school careers. I mean, 9th and 10th graders, are focusing. Is there a process, and where should they go? What should they do that you could talk about that matters?
Well, they should first start looking at all the federal aid that they can get. That should be their starting point. And once they figure out what that gap is, that they need to cover, that's really where the credit union comes in. Visit your credit union to see what program they have available. The Credit Union Student Choice Program is a great program. It's a great option to fill those gaps.
Yeah. One of the problems, I think, let's run to a break. There are 3 or 4 important things I want to get to. We'll run to a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with this discussion, some assistance in how to get student aid to beat the rising costs of college tuition and other expenses.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Well, welcome back. I'm with Corinne Sherman and Lisa Barshinger. We're chatting about student loans and how to deal with the cost of attending college. So, Lisa, let's talk. Look, here's what I think is complicated. So here you are. You're in 9th, 10th grade. Parents, you're thinking about the children going to college. There's a process. I mean, how about the assistants? How about counselors helping them figure out what direction to go in?
Well, it's really important that we're talking to our students about financial education and talking to them about budgeting and credit. And that's really, again, where a credit union steps in. You know, we go out and visit the local high schools and get them thinking about how much money are they going to make in a certain career and how much money they're going to need to earn to have the kind of lifestyle that they want
but
to have.
But the other point is that there's an array of possibilities: private loans, government loans, other kinds of colleges have all kinds. You know, you pick a college, they have all sorts of resources themselves. I mean, it's literally overwhelming.
Yeah, it is, and I think you know, to Lisa's point and to you about the counselors, and part of setting them up in high school is getting them to understand the importance of the career choice and the amount of dollars that they're going to need, along with what school they're going to attend.
Right.
But then understanding what financing options are available. You know, the government loans are available both to students and to parents. They have somewhat of a limited interest rate, but even, you know, as a parent, if you're going to take out a government loan for your child to go to school, it's going to impact the parent's credit score and all kinds of different things. So it's important that those go through that with the students on those government loans, and then what's left is the private loan.
Right.
And if you go out and search for a private loan, you'll see interest rates that range from 16% down to, our credit unions are averaging around 6% or so.
Absolutely.
But what happens here is, don't you end up with some families that, I mean, literally get in way too far, way over their heads. I mean, that's one of the reasons a number of colleges are now going to need-based scholarships. I mean, helping families out. But do you find that people come into you and they're underwater with the debt from college?
Oh, we do. We see that all the time. You know, students looking to consolidate their student loans because they have so many different monthly payments, and that affects their debt-to-income ratio when they want to purchase a home or even purchase a vehicle. That will affect them in the long run.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in, and you'll keep us updated in the credit union for our consumer updates. Really appreciate this opportunity to delve into it. It's a very important topic that's gotten a lot of interest in the press lately. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.